You worked for it, you saved for it, you bought it, and one day when life got expensive, you sold it. That cycle feels like the only way money can move: earn, save, buy, sell, repeat until you run out of time. But the wealthiest people on earth almost never complete that final step. They buy things, they hold them, they borrow against them, and a surprising number of them die still owning nearly everything they ever acquired. And the real answer for why is far stranger than a tax loophole. Start with a distinction almost nobody makes carefully. Income and wealth are not the same thing. Income is a river. It flows past you every month, and most of it flows straight out again into rent, food, fuel, and interest. Wealth is a reservoir. It sits still. It grows on its own. Your salary is a river. A house is a reservoir. A share of a business is a reservoir. Now ask yourself something uncomfortable. When you need money, which one do you reach for? Most people reach for the river. They work more hours. They take a second job. They wait for the next paycheck. And when the river runs dry, they drain the reservoir. They sell the thing that was supposed to grow. Edward Wolf, an economist at New York University who has spent decades tracking how American households actually hold their money, found something that explains almost everything about this gap. For the typical middle-class household, the single largest asset is the family home. For households at the very top, the largest assets are business equity and stocks. Those two portfolios behave completely differently. A house is something you live inside. It has a roof to fix and a tax bill attached. Business equity is something that works while you sleep. But the deeper difference isn't what they own, it's what they do when they need cash. Here's the mechanic almost nobody explains in plain English. In most tax systems, growth is invisible until you sell. If you buy something for 10,000 and it becomes 100,000, you have gained 90,000 on paper. On paper, you owe nothing. The moment you sell, that gain becomes real in the eyes of the tax authority, and a slice of it is taken. Selling is the trigger, not owning, not growing, selling. So what happens if you simply never pull that trigger? A law professor at the University of Southern California named Edwin McCaffrey gave this behavior a name that stuck. He called it buy, borrow, die. Three words that describe how a large fortune can move through an entire lifetime while being taxed remarkably lightly. You buy an asset. You never sell it. When you need cash, you borrow against it, because a loan is not income. Nobody taxes you on money you have promised to give back. Then, in many jurisdictions, when the owner dies, the asset passes to heirs with its value reset to whatever it is worth on that day. The decades of gain that were never taxed are simply never taxed. Read that again, slowly. The person did not cheat. They did not hide anything offshore. They just declined to sell. In 2021, the newsroom ProPublica obtained years of private tax records belonging to some of the richest people in America, and the numbers made the abstracts suddenly concrete. Across the period they examined, the wealth of the very top grew by hundreds of billions, while the federal income tax paid on it was a tiny fraction of that growth. Not because of secret accounts, because growth that is never sold is not income, and income is what the system is built to tax. Does that feel unfair to you? Hold that feeling. It is worth examining, and we will come back to it. But there is a second layer underneath the tax story, and it is the layer that actually applies to your life. Because even if you removed every tax advantage tomorrow, the people who don't sell would still end up ahead. And that has nothing to do with law and everything to do with mathematics. Compounding is not a smooth curve. It is a chain. Each year's growth is built on the total of every year before it, which means the value of holding an asset is concentrated almost entirely at the end. The first 10 years look boring. The last 10 look absurd. Every time you sell, you break the chain and start a new one. Shorter, smaller, beginning again from a lower number because a slice went to tax and another slice went to fees and another slice quietly went to whatever you bought with the proceeds. Thomas Piketty, the French economist whose research on 2 centuries of wealth records became one of the most argued about economics books of the last 20 years, summarized the engine in a single comparison. Over long stretches of history, the return on owned assets has tended to run higher than the growth rate of the overall economy, which means owned things pull away from earned things. Slowly at first, then not slowly. His conclusions are debated seriously by other economists, and you should know that. But the underlying observation is hard to argue with. Ownership compounds, wages don't. So why does almost everyone sell anyway? This is where the story stops being about money and starts being about your brain. In 1979, two psychologists named Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky published research that would eventually earn a Nobel Prize and reshape how economists think about people. They found that losses hurt roughly twice as much as equivalent gains feel good. 100 lost is not canceled out by 100 gained. It takes about 200 gained to feel even. That single asymmetry warps almost every financial decision you will ever make. Because if a loss hurts twice as much, then a gain sitting unlocked in front of you feels fragile, precarious, something that could be taken away. And the fastest way to stop a gain from being taken away is to convert it into cash right now. Two researchers, Hirsch Sheffrin and Meir Statman, gave this pattern a name in 1985: the disposition effect, the tendency to sell winners too early and hold losers too long. Terence O'Dean later tested it against real brokerage records rather than laboratory volunteers, tracking thousands of actual accounts and thousands of actual trades. The pattern held. Ordinary investors sold their winning positions at a significantly higher rate than their losing ones. And on average, the winners they sold went on to outperform the losers they kept. They were quite literally weeding out the flowers and watering the weeds. O'Dean and his colleague Brad Barber then asked a broader question: does all this activity help? They studied tens of thousands of household accounts and published the answer in a paper with a title that gives away the ending. Trading, they concluded, is hazardous to your wealth. The households that traded most actively earned meaningfully less than those who barely traded at all once costs were counted. The most active investors worked the hardest and finished behind the people who did nothing. So here is the twist, and it is not the one you were expecting. The wealthy are not winning because they found a secret. They are winning partly because they are insulated from the emotion that makes you sell. When you already have enough, a market drop is weather. When you don't, it is an emergency. Someone with no cash buffer has to sell at the worst possible moment because the rent is due on the first, regardless of what the market did in March. That is the quiet, brutal part of this. The strategy of never selling isn't primarily a clever idea. It is a luxury purchased with liquidity, which means the first step toward it has nothing to do with investing at all. It is having enough boring, unglamorous cash sitting somewhere dull that you are never forced to break the chain. Now, the balance this deserves. Borrowing against assets is not free and it is not safe. It is leverage, and leverage is symmetrical. When the asset rises, the loan stays the same and you look brilliant. When the asset falls, the loan still stays the same. And that is exactly the problem. In 2021, a fund manager named Bill Huang ran a portfolio built on enormous borrowed exposure. When the underlying positions moved against him, the lenders demanded repayment simultaneously, and the positions were liquidated within days. Something around $20 billion of paper fortune evaporated in roughly 2 trading sessions. He had followed the same logic: buy, borrow. He simply borrowed at a scale where a normal market move became fatal. Interest rates matter too. The borrow half of buy, borrow, die works beautifully when money is cheap. When rates climb, the cost of holding a loan against an asset can quietly exceed what the asset earns, and the whole structure starts eating itself. And the die half depends entirely on specific tax rules in specific countries at a specific moment in history. Those rules are written by legislatures, and legislatures change their minds. Building a plan that only works if the law never moves is its own kind of risk. None of this is a recommendation. It is a description of a machine, so you can see the parts. So bring it back to you. You are probably not going to borrow against $1 billion of stock, but you are right now making the same decision the machine is built around in miniature over and over. Every time you sell an asset to buy something that isn't one, you make a choice about which chain gets to keep growing. Cashing out an investment account for a car, pulling money out of a retirement account early, selling the small position that was finally starting to work because a headline scared you on a Tuesday. None of those are moral failures. Sometimes they are the correct decision. Life is not a spreadsheet, and an asset that costs you your health or your peace was never really an asset. But notice what they have in common. Each one converts a reservoir back into a river, and rivers run out. The people who end up wealthy over a lifetime are rarely the ones who pick the best thing. They are usually the ones who kept holding an ordinary thing while everyone around them found a very good reason to sell. And there is always a very good reason. That is the point. The reason is never absent. Selling always feels justified in the moment, which is precisely why the moment cannot be trusted to decide. So the real question isn't how billionaires avoid tax. It's a smaller and much more personal one. What do you own right now that you are quietly planning to sell? You will work for it. You will save for it. You will buy it. And one day, life will get expensive, and someone will hand you an excellent reason to sell it. That is the moment the whole thing is decided.